right. So today I'm going to be chatting a little bit about the future of open source and innovation, and kind of get us thinking about how we're contributing to innovation as a group. And I just want to get your brains working before we move on to the sessions and absorb all kinds of information later on in the day, and just kind of set the context. So putting people first is kind of the theme of what I want to talk about. And I'm Suzanne Dergacheva. I'm one of the co-founders of Evolving Web. I'm the one usually walking around with a baby, so that's me. I also am on the marketing committee for the Drupal Association. So if you have any ideas at all about how we should market Drupal as a group, I'd love to chat with you about that. That's my other job. So I want to talk, like I said, about the future, where we're heading. I don't know about you, but it kind of feels like we're on the cusp of something new, the cusp of some new technology that's coming, some new innovation that's going to change the way we interact, and maybe change our relationship with technology. It also feels like we're in this innovation bubble where there's all this investment in AI. There's a lot of people putting money into these projects, a lot of people putting their time into AI startups. And maybe we're even in multiple technology bubbles. It feels like there's investors spending huge amounts of money on GPUs, and all of this investment gives a certain flavor to the innovation we're seeing, because it's all driven by, okay, how can we grow this? How can we generate more capital from innovation? And what I really love about Drupal and about being involved in open source is that it's not always just about that. It's not always just about how can we create innovation for innovation's sake. And I think there's sort of this assumption in the world that, we innovate, and innovation's always a good thing. Innovation is this word that comes up and it's always this positive thing. But I love how in the open source community, we question everything, and we think a little bit more about why we're innovating. Every new innovation introduces some level of risk, right? We're opening up ourselves to, how is this technology going to be used? Is it going to be used for better or worse? And these are questions we're talking about all the time now that generative AI is a reality. And so I don't know, all of you are coming from different backgrounds. Some of you work in government on projects. Some of you work at maybe digital agencies. But I've been seeing projects that have been asking for AI to be involved in projects for the last, 5 or 10 years. People say, oh, how can you incorporate AI into this website project? And I think sometimes people are just doing that because they want to be part of this wave. They want to be on the cusp of technology. They want to add the latest trendy thing. They don't want to get left behind. And I think that I totally understand that drive. But I also love the fact that in open source, we see open source playing this role of questioning that and trying to get new perspectives on every new feature that gets added. So all of us who use Drupal, when a new feature gets proposed, like, oh, we should introduce this new module to Drupal, or we should, change how Drupal works so that it does this new thing. It's always being questioned by a whole global community of people with really different perspectives, not just investors coming in and saying, oh, we need to drive profit. And I'll give you an example. When the layout builder module was first introduced to Drupal, this was several years ago, I remember being at a DrupalCon, and there were designers and developers sitting around talking about how this should work. And one of the key things that we were talking about that was really driving the conversation was, how do we build an interface for Drupal for building landing pages or building, these layouts for our content that's actually accessible. And I know a lot of you work in government, so this probably drives a lot of your conversations too. You're thinking, how do we make sure that not just the content we're producing is accessible, but how do we make the tool itself accessible so that anyone can sit down and use this, whether or not they can do drag and drop? Like, how do you build a drag and drop tool for people who might not be able to do that for various reasons? And this is not an easy problem to solve, but it was a problem that everybody was excited to jump into, and that was part of what was driving the innovation. And that's not necessarily something that happens when you have investors driving the technology. And with new things, new features coming down the line, the possibility that Drupal would be integrated with generative AI or other AI tooling, I think we can expect the same thing. We can expect that there's going to be this questioning of, well, is this going to respect personal privacy? Is it worth having this new innovation if we're giving up some level of privacy or security for the projects we're building? And I love the fact that it's not just me who has to think about all these problems, but there's a whole community of people out there who are kind of concerned about best practices and want to make sure that Drupal does the right thing. So I love that, like, we're at this phase. I think we'll think back to this time in the future and think about this tension in the room between not wanting to get left behind, but also wanting to expect more from the technology. And I think Drupal gives us this great solution to this problem because it gives us some kind of standardization. We can build a common tool that we can all benefit from. It helps us as individuals not get left behind or as individual organizations, but it also allows us to anticipate some of the problems that new innovations might bring. And I think you can think now to your own projects. All of you are probably here because you work in Drupal in some capacity, and think about how you're innovating. And you might not think about your work as innovating all the time, but I think with Drupal, we're always innovating in some way or another, either because we're building a new type of thing with Drupal, we're actually using Drupal's functionality to build something new. A lot of us do that on with websites or apps that we're building. We can also kind of innovate next to Drupal. We can build some very exciting new UI with React, but integrate that into Drupal because it's designed to do that because of its composable nature. And then we can also innovate on Drupal itself as a product. So I talked a little bit about Layout Builder, how we have this accessible tool for creating landing pages. Well, we can make things like that better. You'll hear later today about, improvements to Layout Builder, how we can make Drupal a better product in and of itself. And so I think all of us are innovating, and so these questions of how we do that and what's driving our innovation are important. And so I want to challenge you to think about this today and think about how you're using open source. I really love talking about open source adoption and how that works, and I'm curious how your organizations all got started using Drupal. I think this has a lot to teach us, and so I want to invite, or I have on the line here Nikhil Deshpande, who works for the state of Georgia, and he's also on the Drupal Association Marketing Committee with me. And we're going to chat more about this question of open source adoption and how it works. So Nikhil, can you hear me? Can you say something? I want to make sure.
Hi, good morning. I can hear you just fine. Are you able to hear me okay?
Oh, yeah. Everyone's good? Everyone? Amazing. Oh, and here you are on the screen. Perfect. Okay.
Good morning, Ottawa.
Good morning. And I wish I could turn the screen around to, yeah, we'll turn the screen around later. There's a full room of people here, eagerly, very awake. Everybody's alert because they're drinking their coffee. And yeah, excited to hear your thoughts on all these topics. So I want to just start by talking about how we each got started in open source. When I started using open source, I was excited because you could open up the code and learn things from it. I was a developer, or learning to be a developer, didn't have a background, and just thought it was fun that you could open up the code and actually literally see how it was built. And so Nikhil, I'm wondering how you got started or interested in open source and in Drupal in particular.
Yeah, I think my experience was not very different than what you just mentioned. It was all about the quest of learning something at our own timeline, right? Like I could take a course or learn something which was still contained within what was taught to me, or I could just learn by, kind of like the whole old method of like what Leonardo, Michelangelo did, like just like sneak into the morgues and open corpses to understand human anatomy, right? Like how is it built? How have other people done this? And I think that's kind of like the tinkering nature and I'm primarily a designer. I'm not a developer, right? So my background is in user experience and design, but I was very much inclined and eager to understand and learn. When someone tells me, no, this cannot be done, like, why not? So let me explore, let me teach myself how to. So that's really kind of like where I got in my hands into open source. And I was very thankful that it allowed me to learn so many things at my own pace, at my own time. And that's pretty much what was like the beginning of me becoming, an open source advocate.
Oh, amazing. I know here in Ottawa in the room there's a lot of people, like I said, who maybe hands up who works in I just kind of assume a lot of people work in government, but I'm not 100% sure who those people are. Yeah, there's a lot of people here who work in government, who work in also different public sector organizations kind of adjacent to government. A lot of us, I think, are working in higher education as well. And we've seen kind of these waves of adoption in the federal government here in Canada of folks adopting Drupal. Why do you think Drupal is such a natural fit for these types of projects?
You mean why Drupal is a natural fit for government
for government projects
adoption?
Yeah.
I mean, there are several things. One is like as a government, as a technologist, or as a person making the decision on behalf of like how we decide on a certain kind of service delivery. As much as we are aware of technology, as much as we are aware of like what needs to be done, we also need to be aware that we are using public funds. And if there is an open source solution that does exactly what you're looking for, like my thought always has been, and one of the big criteria for when we moved to Drupal from a proprietary content management system almost about 12 years ago. That was one of the key factors, even before I had zeroed down on Drupal, was that I wanted to open the door for open source. When I took the web director job back then, the culture was that, open source was not even a contender in what options that we were looking for. And, I remember challenging that. And what I found out was that there was a lot of learning and education to be done as far as just open source itself is concerned, because, a lot of people just kind of had heard the fact that like it's free, and immediately they were like, well, how good can it be if it's free? And I know some of these can sound like very old conversations, but I'm actually surprised even now in this day and age, I'm having some of those conversations. But Specifically about Drupal, what attracted me the most was that, obviously, other than the fact that it being open source, it allowed us a lot of flexibility and customization that I saw that we were struggling with in just trying to use something that was proprietary. The next thing that was very important for us was obviously security, because a lot of the folks who were, kind of wagging their finger at me for open source, that's like one of the things they were concerned about. And I was actually happy to show them the level of security focus that Drupal had in terms of like this Drupal security team, just the amount of active monitoring that was happening to address vulnerabilities. Like also there was a great evidence of everything, all the security updates and what the community was doing to contribute. So the security aspect was, when that box was checked, I felt like the battle was half won for us. But in general, like, well, I guess maybe it may help in talking about what we did just a little bit. So what we did at the state of Georgia is we created a content management system as the official platform for all the state websites. And again, this was not mandated. This is something I want to say that we started out with just a handful of agencies, and without any mandate from legislation or the governor. Other agencies who saw agencies using Drupal saw the benefits, saw the value in it, and volunteered to be the next agency to join this platform. So at this point today, I think we have about 95% of our state agency footprint hosted on this single code base. And we have sites as big as Department of Revenue, Human Services, Labor, all the way down to a small site for like a certain lake somewhere in the state. So the scalability of it was very important for us, and that's what Drupal allowed us. Another thing that was really important for me was accessibility compliance. And in here, I really saw what a great job Drupal had already done, and also the investment coming in from the community to make sure that all the accessibility features are taken care of. The community commitment to accessibility was really great. And I know there's some really awesome folks, who I now know personally, who have done a lot towards making sure that Drupal is accessible and compliant. But I felt like Drupal just off the bat checked off all the boxes as far as like workflow, compliance, or just integration capabilities, because end of the day, at the core of it, Drupal is a CMS, but as a platform, it also needed to integrate with other things. And also that is something that Drupal allowed for us. So I feel like in general, like looking at it, Drupal seemed like a very all-rounded solution for what we were looking for.
I love that story, because you're talking about, using the carrot instead of the stick, really getting people motivated and inspired maybe by what they're seeing other people do, and so that they really want to adopt Drupal more at the agency level. It also sounds like you've built this great maybe institutional culture around it, when you talk about how people start to really know about accessibility and things like this. Do you have any recommendations for this kind of institutional learning, like getting people to share knowledge across agencies and across organizations?
Sure. I mean, I can just share what we have been doing, and it is always a struggle. Obviously, I'm not going to pretend like this is the recipe. Go and do it in your organization, and it will work. But I think you're right. Like, I think it is very important to start out with that education factor, and we have to slowly influence the culture. It is impossible to change the culture by a certain mandate or certain legislation. I think it needs to come from within, and that comes with education. And I think once we implemented Drupal open source, I remember doing almost a roadshow across all the state agencies, their CIOs, their leadership, in talking about this. and the fact that like why we did this, why we are doing this. And even if they were already part of it or not, it was very nice to share some of that. And the fact that like we were doing this knowledge sharing culture, and this was not just contained within Georgia. What we did was we looked outside, and although Georgia was one of the first states to be using Drupal at an enterprise level, we were seeing a lot of adoption at the federal level, and also some other states had started jumping on open source and Drupal, implementing that within their own states. So they were automatically just reaching out, asking for lessons learned, or just establishing that culture sharing, a knowledge sharing culture, basically. I think that was very important, because then we could take our lessons learned, share with them, also vice versa. But I think the key was that we really got the leadership on board, because this would not have worked if the leadership was not convinced about it. And once the leadership was convinced, then we slowly saw that even they played a big role in promoting this working in the open kind of culture. And that helped a lot. But then, really, I think what really helped us was that we were very vocal about what we were doing. We were very vocal about the problems we were having, and we were just amazed at how many other organizations jumped in to say, hey, we had this problem, this is how we solved it. And I feel like, that just automatically sucks you in that culture of like, then you do it for 5 other people. So I would say that, just like create some sort of a platform for everyone to come in with their ideas, their thoughts, their fears, their problems. And, if you kind of do that on a regular basis within your organization, also find sister organizations the way we found, other states doing this. I mean, honestly, even to this date, I spend a good amount of time speaking with other states, other local governments, maybe some nonprofit organizations who are looking to implement Drupal. And in no way I pose myself as like someone who is like an evangelist or trying to push it, or sell it to them. I just tell them about what we did, and I've been very honest about this is what we were able to achieve. This is what we were not able to achieve. And, you pick what works for you. And I mean, in most cases, almost in all cases, they're very easily convinced that this is what they want to do. But just having that open forum for dialogues, having a regular cadence for people to come together, maybe even establish some level of like mentorship, I think that will really going to help.
Okay, so if people are having problems with their leadership getting on the Drupal bandwagon, they should speak to you. That's great. We've been talking a lot about like the ways that Drupal's really helped and building this great culture, but I'm wondering if there's any big challenges you faced with Drupal adoption, or just how Drupal works in general, if there's been like major issues that you faced along the way.
Adoption in the sense, just going back to trying to convince leadership about open source and Drupal. I think you just mentioned that about people trying to convince their leadership. I think it's very important to understand what their resistance is. In my case, when I was speaking with my leadership back then, we are very much a state that leans on larger organizations. And of course, no one goes on record to say this, but all of us have heard in different shapes and forms about that. Nobody got fired for hiring a large organization or certain names of large organizations, because end of the day, the sentiment is you just need someone to hold responsible if something goes wrong. And I feel like anyone who is advocating for something like this, first of all, we have to understand what we are advocating in and out. And in the sense of how can we bridge that gap of like, okay, you can go to, you can say that this particular tool or this particular software is owned by this organization. But thankfully, in the Drupal ecosystem, there are so many awesome agencies and partners who have partnered with us in being that responsible body, right? So when we implemented Drupal, I mean, it was a culture shift. It was absolutely culture change, and you know, our instinct was to create something that was in Drupal in a sense that people were used to using our proprietary content management system. But you know, that is exactly where we took a step back and we were like, we don't want to just recreate a problem in a different technology. You know, we need to truly see what Drupal can do for the merit of what Drupal is, and then create an experience that really helps people, you know, do their jobs a lot better. You know, it just kind of kept bringing me back to, I forgot who said this, but it's just like, you know, do the right thing, do the thing right. Right. So, you know, I knew using open source, using Drupal, we were doing the right thing. The next step was to do the thing right. But I felt like compared to what we were using, using Drupal was automatically such an upgrade for us. So really at the initial phase, we did not find much of a gap in what we were trying to do. So I cannot say I wish Drupal did this back in the day, that, you know, today we are doing this, but I do see that where, you know, Drupal, we used it purely as a content management system. And although, you know, now other organizations have used Drupal for way many things beyond just a CMS, we leaned on a lot of third-party solutions that worked with Drupal, but we purely use Drupal as a CMS. But I do kind of see, like, today, if we were to do that, we may invest a little more in building a lot of that within Drupal itself.
Building more, and so we're having fewer technologies to integrate with.
Right.
So speaking of integrating with other technologies, I know your actual title, I didn't say it at the beginning, is, if I get it right, Chief Digital and AI Officer. And so I want to ask about that AI part. How do you think AI should be integrated into Drupal, or what should we be thinking about in the Drupal community on this topic?
Yeah, and I think you had a really good introduction to when you said AI. We really should be asking ourselves, what is the problem and what are we trying to solve? AI, absolutely, I feel like it's a game changer. It's a paradigm shift, and a lot of people have even gone few steps ahead in saying, like, this is how it's going to change the way automobiles changed from, you know, horse buggies, or even like the iPhone moment, where, you know, we were so used to the flip phones, and our experience of using the internet on a phone was very much contained within that small window. But iPhone just completely changed that, and I feel like AI has that potential. But I mean, it's also it's a tool, and, you know, kind of like a knife, you can use it, you can weaponize it, or you can use it to save lives if handled by a surgeon. AI just needs that very careful governance, and that's exactly what my role is within the state. You know, like I said, I am not someone who sprouted out a technology, so I'm not one of those people who are just, you know, kind of dazed by the glitter and the glamour of AI and all the possibilities. But when I see something, my focus is on what problem is it solving, and if it is solving the real problems, if it's actually adding value to something that helps an employee save hours from their days, or even minutes from their tasks, I feel like it's worth it, and it's worth exploring what we can do. And, you know, just if we are able to bear the costs of implementing that solution, then I'm all for it. So that's really kind of like where our leadership saw the role that, you know, we cannot escape this AI wave, obviously, and no one wants to. You know, we want to make the most of it, but we don't want to use it for the sake of, you know, we don't want to like brag that we are an AI state. But, you know, at some point, it's just going to be an expectation that you are using AI. But how do we use it? Are we using it ethically? Because every decision that is made today by an algorithm or a human affects people. And if we automate decision making, what are going to be the consequences? I feel like, these questions, these conversations need to be very important. They need to be, reminded for the folks who are doing this. And no one wants to do this ill-intentioned, but if we don't have all the needed guardrails in place, it's very easy for us to kind of lose sight if that is indeed, being checked or being, in the design of a certain application or a service delivery. So that's really the intention of where, AI is going to be a big part of our service delivery within the state of Georgia. And I'm excited about this role. I'm really excited to see already what some of our vendor partners have been doing across other organizations. And, we are looking at doing a lot of good things within the state.
Oh, I like bringing up the content governance issue, because I find sometimes when we start to talk about AI, we get concerned about the governance of the content that it's generating. But at the same time, we already have a lot of people creating content, and sometimes we have huge gaps in the content governance we already have in place. So it kind of forces us to figure out what our governance should be, which seems like a good thing. So I love how it kind of comes back to this governance topic that I think a lot of us have been thinking about recently. One other kind of technology trend that's been coming through the Drupal community recently has been the move to decoupled architectures. I know our team's built some projects that are hybrid or decoupled. Is this something that you're using already, or something that you've considered adopting? And do you have any thoughts on the viability of decoupled architectures with Drupal?
We have looked at it very recently when we upgraded our platform. We try and again, take an approach of like, yes, it's a really awesome technology. Obviously, I mean, I feel like it's significant. It has significant merit in Drupal in a decoupled headless context. But specifically for us, like for our implementation, I kind of keep going back to like, what will it do as far as solving the problem that we already have, or are we even ready for it as an organization, to be perfectly honest with you? And when we looked at the kind of I feel like the power that it gives, right? Like I feel like I'll be ready to kind of take on that level of responsibility. And as a state, as an organization with so many departments and so many distinct responsibilities in the verticals of human services, law enforcement, taxes, revenue, all those things, I felt like from a governance perspective, we still believed in using Drupal in the sense of having the front end and the back end together. But I know for sure that we will be using this going forward for something that makes sense to use. We have a lot of singular I would say time-limited campaigns that come up, where I know there are certain organizations that would love to have other technology for the front end. But our goal always has been to use Drupal as the core CMS, the single source of truth, and then we can, thankfully, again, like one of the things now that Drupal has is the API first, approach. It basically enables API first with all the possibilities. I think we can definitely leverage that. This day, we don't have anything, but we have definitely not decided against it. We are just looking for the right implementation use case for it.
That's great. I think a lot of organizations are there where it's like, it's really nice to have this option, and we're just excited to find applications for fun things we can build with React or with other front end technologies. So just before we wrap up, I know we've been talking a lot about Drupal, but I'm wondering if there's any other open source technologies you're excited about these days that you've heard about or that you're trying. If there's anything else that's kind of piqued your interest that you want to bring up.
I mean, with my role lately, I'm a little far away from the actual technology implementation to really kind of get into the conversations of what is exciting my tech team. But I have heard a ton of excitement around React or Next Node.js. I mean, specifically, open source technology, obviously Docker. So there are many, but I think pretty much my team at this point knows, and our conversations typically start with like, all right, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And if the technology is an obvious fit, then great, let's pursue that. But I think the important part is that changing of the culture where open source should get the same seat at the table as the other technologies that actually are represented by lobbyists. And I think the important part is that we are a collective army of folks who just needs to be an advocate of open source. Otherwise, that's not going to happen. I mean, we all know that like we can't afford lobbyists. We can afford like sales folks who could just keep showing up at my door almost every month, trying to show me something new that their software is doing them, and especially with this whole AI wave. I mean, I cannot get into a conversation without AI being brought up in the first 30 seconds. So I do feel like there's, whatever it is, I mean, if like we looked at Elasticsearch, we looked at GraphQL, I mean, there's so many things out there, I feel, and which is great. I feel like, open source is only growing, it's only maturing, and it's about time that, other organizations, especially government organizations, should always look at, the viability and the feasibility of open source along with other solutions that they, have been using it for decades.
Right. Thanks. Well, thanks, Nikhil, for joining us. And just to kind of recap and to motivate everybody today, I think we can all play some role in advocating for Drupal by listening to case studies about Drupal and telling our own stories about Drupal and open source and how it's made a difference in our organizations. Because I think, what we've been chatting about today, what's come up again and again is really how sharing this knowledge and advocating really has a lot to do with storytelling and saying, here's how we're using Drupal, here's our success story, here's what we've integrated with Drupal and how it's made a difference. And that can help other people advocate for Drupal and lead to adoption at their organizations. So thanks so much for all of your insights. And I'm going to pass it back to Maya, I think.
Thank you so much for
having me. And we want to show you the audience.
Yes, please. Oh, wow. That's fantastic. That's great. Awesome. Well, I wish I was there in person. Maybe in one of the warmer months.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. Take care.